Welcome everybody to In Conversation, where today my esteemed guest is artist, writer and teacher, Michael Torlen. Michael, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started talking about your latest book, Studio Seeing, might I ask, first of all, where you're calling in from?
Well, I'm calling in from Westbrook, Maine, and that's a town that's just outside of Portland, Maine.
So that's the Northeast, right?
Absolutely. We're not right on the ocean, but of course Portland is, and that was really important to me, to be near the sea.
That's actually something I wanted to ask you about today, because it seems that Maine and the coastal Northeast are important locations for you and also for your artwork. It seems that much of your artwork depicts the region and many nautical scenes. Can you tell us a little bit about your connection to the region and why it still remains so important to you, both in terms of your work and personally?
Yes, absolutely. I was born in California. My father was a commercial tuna fisherman, and he came from Norway. He was an immigrant. And I grew up near the sea and near boats and the fisheries, and all of that quality of life was very important to me. That's how I was formed, essentially. And when I was teaching in New York, that was in the 80s, I first came to Maine sort of on a vacation, and I intended to try to paint watercolors. I'd never done that really before, so I started trying to do that. I was terrible. And so I set about as a goal to try to paint plein air watercolors in front of the sea. And so I came to Maine every summer, starting in the 1980s, and eventually moved myself to Mohegan Island during the summer, and I've been painting there for about 25 years. And that's sort of the body of my plein air work, working in front of a turbulent, changing ocean, which is extremely challenging.
I can imagine, and if people are interested in seeing your artwork, which of course I'm sure they are, I think your website hosts much of your sort of historical work, right, and new projects that you're working on. Can you just tell us the best maybe web address if people wanted to go and see some of your portfolio of paintings?
Yes, absolutely. It's michaeltorlen.com. That's the portfolio site. And then inside there, you'll find a series of works, songs from my father, which are essentially the watercolors, the plein air work, and then Sanger from Moor, which is songs from my mother, who is also Norwegian, by the way. And that's a much more narrative work, which I started probably 20 years ago, 2 decades ago. So that's a companion. I work in essentially 2 different sort of styles. One is the plein air direct, working from the sea, and the other is a more narrative work about themes of love and death and cancer and a whole bunch of other subjects, which are sort of more personal, but they're related to this larger question.
Well, I have to admit that, well, since working with you on Studio Seeing and of course in the preparation for this conversation, I've been looking at a lot of your work, and I find it magical. I really love the stuff, especially your watercolors. But I did want to ask a little bit about your practice and just whether do you work solely in sort of watercolors, or do you work in, or should I say, do you solely paint? What mediums do you work in, and what's your preferred medium these days, and why?
Right, that's a great question. When I first came to Maine, I as I say, I couldn't paint watercolors, and I had to learn how to do that. And now I do that when I go and I have a direct motif in front of me, like Mohegan Island, the rocks and crashing waves. And but when I'm in the studio, I work more on this narrative project. And the other thing that I did is for years, I made monoprints. So I would go to a printmaking studio and work on a whole series of monoprints. And that experience I have now turned over, in a sense, used it in the studio to make paintings. And I work on panel with acrylic material with many of the same techniques that I used when I was monoprinting. So those are different sort of aspects of my my work, the plein air and then the narrative stuff.
And would you say that your work has been influenced by any past masters, or is it more just about what you see in front of you? But yeah, who are your greatest influences, if you take any?
Well, of course, for the watercolors, it's got to be Winslow Homer, who said, I live by my watercolors. I mean, watercolor has some kind of a odd reputation of being sort of little old ladies medium. It is not. It's the most difficult mediums to work with because it's unforgiving. That is to say, put down a mark, you put another mark down, and the one you just made doesn't cover up the one you did before. So it's always sort of revealed, and that's kind of the beauty of it. It's always sort of transparent. The white allows the color, the light to come through the color. And that's a much more direct and unforgiving medium, as I said.
It's it's interesting you say that, because I suppose for many of us, watercolors are perhaps the first and last medium that we work in as kids. Maybe we've been drawing, we've used charcoals and things of that nature, and then your grandma or someone gets you one of those basic watercolor sets, and it's often the first and last medium that people engage with from in terms of their own juvenile art practice. So it's interesting that you say how difficult and complex it is. So it's often maligned, but I think your work shows why it shouldn't be.
Yeah, well, Homer's watercolors really showed me a lot of things. I thought that it was sort of a precious medium, but when you look closely at Homer's work, you see that he took razor blade and erased areas and scraped areas and reworked areas. So there was a lot of kind of freeing when I saw Homer's work, freeing in terms of the approach to the media. But painting the sea was also part of the challenge, not only controlling the medium, but also the motif, because the motif is constantly changing. There are no contours that remain the same. The tide changes, the waves change, the rocks change, the light change, contour, shadows, everything is always changing. So because it's always changing, you have to make it up. And as you make it up, that's how you sort of, create whatever it is you're looking at. You have to make it up and make it a mark at a time. And it isn't something you sort of don't paint a watercolor. You have to create it over time.
Wow.
It's not like going out there with a camera and taking a shot. That's not what it is. It's much more. Well, it's different. It's different than taking a photograph.
Thank you very much for that insight. Would you say then that you're kind of particularly influenced or interested in that American tradition then of painting and landscapes?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's a very interesting question, because when I first came to Maine in the 80s, I had an opportunity to take a vacation from teaching, and I had established pretty much a career making kind of symbolic abstractions, what I call spiritual abstractions. And I decided to make a change. And I was studying American landscape painting, which is very unique to America. And a lot of guys were, and I guess women as well, were painting Maine as part of this quote Hudson River School. And so I decided, well, I'm going to go up there and do that. And so I was chasing, Robert Henry and George Bellows and the American tradition. Absolutely.
And how does that American tradition then link into, I suppose, your own artistic development based upon what you've just said? Did you have any teachers? Are you self-taught? Did you study art? And when you went up there, did you tap into that existing network and lineage of great American painters who were operating on the Hudson?
That's a very interesting question.
But a lot there to unpack.
There is. How to answer that? I was given, when I was interested in watercolor, one of my mentors, Harold Greger, who is whom I dedicated my book to, had a sheet he sent me through the mail about the English method. And you'll be interested in that. The English method is a method where you work wet over dry, and you work in layers with a minimum palette of dark, light, and middle tone,
Right.
3 values, and you try to work with percentages. So most of the sheet is light, part of the sheet is middle tone, and a small amount of the sheet is dark. And all of those 3 things, trying to balance that and get that working, is what I was using for a number of years. And I worked from photographs, and I worked in plein air, and I just kept trying to learn how to do that. And so when I went to Maine, at first, it was a humbling experience because I was no good. And then I decided to take this rather seriously. And so during the year between going to Maine to paint, I would work in the studio on this kind of self-taught method of using my interpretation of the English method. And that's how I learned.
It's fascinating to get a bit of an insight into your process and some of the technicalities there. Yeah, well, I think maybe it sounds like you certainly know what you're talking about. So it seems like an apt moment to perhaps jump into the book, which of course you have behind you, and it's called Studio Seeing: A Practical Guide to Drawing, Painting, and Perception. So, in your own words, can you just tell us a little bit about the book first of all? What's it all about? And then perhaps we can talk a bit more about why you felt compelled to write such a book. But yeah, in your own words, what's Studio Seeing all about, Michael?
Studio Seeing is about seeing, and the subtitle, of course, is Drawing, Painting, and Perception. The book extends the legacy of my teacher, Hoyt Sherman, who was at Ohio State University, and his student, Harold Greger, who was another mentor of mine. And I studied with these people, and what they did for me was to open up my eyes to the idea and the thought and the realization that it's all about perception. Everything is about perception, and painting and drawing is no exception. That is a perceptive phenomenon. And the book articulates how we see on a regular, normal basis what you might call customary perception, as we're using now, which is basically a response to a 3-dimensional world. And how that differs from being responsive to 2-dimensional surface, which is a painting, a drawing, a design, a print. And those two are very different. So we don't use the same visual cues in drawing and painting exactly that we use in life, similarly. And that is the big problem. The human eye and the brain has 2 modes of seeing. One is the detail-oriented, which we normally use. This is customary seeing, where we're seeing and identifying what a thing is what its name, what color is it, what name is it, and so on. But we also have a peripheral vision, which is out here somewhere. And that's the where, the response to where something is. You find something that moves over here and you look and then you focus. And that's our biological genetic makeup. That's how we operate in the world. Now, the problem is when you work on painting and drawing, people have a tendency to bring the customary seeing about objects, things, people, places, and things to bear on what they're doing. But on a two-dimensional surface, the most important cue is the where cue, where something is. It doesn't have any meaning if it doesn't have the right location. A hand can't be a hand unless it's in the right location. So it's all about position, where. And that's the primary visual cue in painting and drawing. And that's why it's so difficult for people to learn to paint and draw, because they don't understand this. And that's what this book is about. Why you need to understand that and how you go about doing that. How you understand where is the most important cue, not what. And most people come with the what. They want to draw the thing that they see and name. There's more to say about this, but I think I'll go too far.
No, it's fascinating stuff, and I mean, we don't want to give the whole book away, but
Well,
but it's it's that's fascinating, and it also, what you've done there is you've highlighted how although the book is very accessible, you're also highlighting how technical it is as well, and it really does provide, thought-provoking examples and questions and answers to provoke people and to make them think about the processes that go into sort of painting. Perhaps with that in mind, you could tell us a little bit more about some of the sections. The book is split into many different sections, and maybe tell us a little bit about why you wrote some of those sections and what people can expect from them.
Happy to do that. Can I? I'll look at the book.
Please.
To do that. And the first sections are the it was called the front matter. We've got a foreword by Julian Kramer, who's a colleague at Purchase. And I thought it was really very good. He sets up the pedagogy as kind of an American tradition, talks a lot about my influences. Then the preface and introduction are things that I wrote. The preface tells us a little bit about the background and how I came to do it. And then the intro courses to the book. The first chapter is called The Fear Factor. And we start with that because that's really the factor that kind of stops most people from everything.
Yeah.
And a lot of examples about mistakes. But I also quote Miles Davis, who said, if you're not making a mistake, that's a mistake. So it's trying to get people to understand that there are no real mistakes. You just work with what you got. And then there's a chapter on how we see, which is the conventional visual cues, the discussion of our customary visual cues. And then the next chapter is about the artist's visual cues, which include, of course, position, size, and shape, and overlap, and then value, and then color. And then I talk about how I came to this with Hoyt Sherman, Gestalt psychology, and neuroscience, which is an important key to understanding the what and the where idea. And then we talk about figure ground, which is probably the central chapter. It's in the middle of the book, and it really talks about not only seeing in painting and drawing, but seeing everything. And then I decided that I better do a little more about what's going on, and in terms of a painting itself. And I talk about closure, coincidence, and veg. And then there are 3 chapters that go back to kind of conventional methods that people know about drawing and painting. But you see, in this book, I talk about drawing, painting together. Most books are about one media differentiation. They'll talk about painting, or talk about drawing. This talks about both because the process is what I'm talking about. It's not about the medium. It's not about the techniques. It's not about the how-to. It's about the process. And then I go back to Muscles and Marks, which is about how to train your kinesthetic marking. Because everybody has a natural way of marking, which is usually something they developed when they were children. And so when they first start drawing, so many people just start with a little sketching thing because they're afraid and so on. And you have to develop, this, what I'm talking about right here,
Yeah.
and your arm, your body, and then about what I call the organizational cues, which is how you get something on the paper that's in proportion to something you want or something you see. And this all has to do with plumb, level, and square, which are the fundamentals to building a house or a building, but they're also fundamental to painting and drawing. And then I talk about another approach, which is using the focal point. And then I go to fixing, which is where people think, well, how am I going to make this work? This really is a mess. I don't like this part. And most people most instructors say, well, just change the part, change its color. And of course, that's the last thing you should do. And then the end of the book is about the fact that all of this training is really a beginning.
Yeah.
It just launches you, and then you become whatever you want. And, I end the book with one of my wonderful students who's actually ended up making crochets. So, it's not about training people to do anything. It's about training people to see so they can do whatever they want. And the goal is really to make an academy of individuals.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully well put, and that's definitely a lot of what I read into the book as well. It's very there's a lot of theory. It's very philosophical. It's very beautifully written, very easy to read. But then there is a certain elements of like training manual there as well. People garner a lot of skills and technical understanding from reading the book, but you do prime it in a more philosophical and theoretical way, which I think is also very important. So you are spanning these different kinds of disciplines. And one of the things which also stands out for me, and I think does make the book quite unique, is your use of your personal experience and these exercises. Is there anything you'd want to say on how you integrated those into the body of the text? Because I think they function very well.
Thank you. The anecdotes, I wanted to make the book personal and sort of friendly and make it about experience rather than theory. And so I was always trying to use examples that were anecdotal to do that, to illustrate that. And I have many more, I think about it all the time when I've had different encounters with students and situations like that. And I forgot what the other one was. What was your other question? Part of that?
Oh, no, I mean, really, you've kind of answered it in the sense that the book is definitely kind of like a training manual in many respects. And there are theoretical elements and all these philosophical elements, but you really do draw upon personal experience. And like you say, these personal anecdotes and these exercises as well that you give people, I think are really interesting. But yeah, it does make it much more of a personal, read, and I think your voice is very present. It doesn't just feel like a training manual.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. The exercises were because I wanted also to engage the reader who wanted to try to practice what it means. And we start off really with the first one having to do with, the finger and the nose and how we see two things. And then we put another one here, and our binocular vision, our natural sense is ambiguous. But if you close one eye, you see them jump around. The one eye is the monocular vision, and that's the vision you need to develop in painting and drawing, because painting and drawing is monocular. And that's what the visual cues are. So we start really with that, and then we go to the theory of position, size, brightness, all on that two-dimensional surface.
And when you were writing this book, who were you intending the main audience to be? Is this really for artists, or is it for art scholars, or for more of a, who did you intend this for when you were writing it? And do you think that's still the key audience?
Well, I was thinking of it. This would be a book I wish I'd had when I was a student.
Right.
And I also, the first go round of this thing, which was over 25 years ago, the book had the work of Hoyt Sherman and his pedagogy mixed with the student application, the student intention, the work for the student or the artist. And I realized I had to separate those two things out. So I wrote Hit with a Brick, Teaching of Hoyt Sherman, which was published by Intellect Books in 2013 in one of your journals.
Right.
And then I got back on the horse and decided, okay, I need to write the other side, which is a book for students. And that turned then into a project that I would see students, artists, and teachers of students, or artist teachers, as well as your Sunday painter who is interested in learning a little more, as well as an art historian who might really want to know what an artist does instead of only analyzing what it looks like at the end of the game. And a designer, anyone's working on a two-dimensional surface, a printmaker. And because it's anecdotal and it has some kind of different ways of talking about this, and it's fully illustrated, it's got 100 illustrations, I thought it would also be useful and interesting to anyone who's interested in visual arts. So that would be a general reader who, likes painting and likes to go to the museum and likes to see works of art.
Yeah, normally I might stop you there, but I think actually you're dead right, because the lavish illustrations are fantastic. The book's aesthetics, it's a beautiful book to just leaf through. But I think you're right there. The book really does tap into just the interested reader because of that lineage you talk about in terms of teaching art, the American traditions, the illustrations, of course, and what they add to the book. And I think you're right. Yeah, just a general reader, a painter, and someone just kind of interested in art history more generally will definitely pick this up and enjoy reading it. Do you have any hopes for the book? Are there any specific goals that how would you like it to be used?
Well, I'd love to see it in every art school in the country. And thanks to Intellect, maybe every art school in the world, and in libraries as a research model, but also something just as an interesting book about seeing. But that's really what I'd like to see for it.
And writing a book like this and committing to create such a volume, you must have faced a few challenges. Are there any challenges you'd share with us? What were some of the challenges you faced when you were trying to create this book?
Well, the first one, of course, is how do you write about visual phenomena?
Yeah, good point. Yeah,
because everything happens all at once. Unlike all the linear thinking and experience of other arts as well as writing. Writing has a linear trajectory, 1, 2, 3, and people coming to a book often expect to have that kind of impact. Where is this going? But when you confront a visual problem or visual situation, it's all at once. and then you get into it. So it's almost backwards. So that was the first challenge. I mean, the biggest challenge is how do you articulate clearly, without not a lot of art speak and gobbledygook. How do you talk clearly about what's going on visually? What are we seeing, and why are we seeing what we are seeing? And that was a question that started me years and years ago. Is when I look at a painting, why do I see anything but a skin of goo? Because there's nothing there. There's only paint on the surface. Why? Why do you see that? So I tried to write that book, why we see that. Another challenge, I don't type. So 2 fingers. 25 years of 2 fingers and an incredible number of drafts, rewrites. Then the challenge of all those illustrations, all those lavish illustrations, those cost money and they're difficult to get. The permissions are very difficult to get, very time consuming, very challenging. And it was, last minute, we were at a place where I didn't have one, and suddenly someone came and said, a publisher came, oh, yeah, we have that one available for you if you'd like. So, that was a challenge. All of those things are challenging.
Well, while we're talking about challenges, just to jump around a little bit and to move away from the book for a moment, someone in your position, I did want to ask what you thought maybe some of the greatest challenges facing young artists today could be.
Well, it's an age-old problem. It really is, but today is very much more challenging, much more difficult. It's time, money, and community, and those are the 3 things. You have to try to balance all that. Now, it's possible that the internet and social media will provide some of that community. I don't know that, but that's why a lot of artists always sort of move to, try to get to New York or try to get to LA or go to London, wherever you are, to try to get to a community sufficient with a critical mass big enough to support an artist. But it's very difficult today, and that would be, to me, the primary challenge. However, I think there's a reason to be optimistic, and that is anyone who's creatively and passionately driven to do this, more than just sort of a hobby, but even a hobby is important, has agency, has the opportunity to create. They are creators. We're all creators. There is a sense in which we're all creating our own life. And that would get me into another level of the conversation. But I feel very strongly that, once you have that appetite, and if it's fed, no one takes that away from you. It's incredibly fulfilling, just to be creative. And to plug another book, I guess, is Rick Rubin's book, The Creative, what is it called? Creative Life, I think. Rick Rubin's new book. I mean, that speaks to, it's not about necessarily fame and fortune. It's about fulfilling this drive to create. And that seems to be, shall we say, God-given. I don't want to, get off the mark here, but there's a sense of the spirituality comes into this.
I think that comes across in the book as well, to be honest with you. Well, I mean, thank you. That's a really beautiful point, and I just really kind of maybe want to ask you to finish things off today. What's next for you? What's on the horizon? Are you writing again? Are you still painting? What are you working on?
Well, I have a lot of things on my plate. I have a Memento Mori series, which I've been working on the last couple of years. I had an exhibition last year at Coast Street Art of Memento Mori, and it is a response to the fact that I had cancer, and I came through that, and I was very impressed with the medical technology that was going on. And I found that inspiring, and some of that imagery I've integrated within my own sort of set of cast of characters. And so I'm continue that project. There's another project called The Ocean Blues, which is a project that has a little more emphasis on global warming. And I have been interested in and concerned about and exploring a reaction to global warming, particularly with relationship to the sea and to the fishery. The planet is 70% water, 70% ocean, actually. And as the oceans warm and the planet deteriorates because of global warming, we're going to be in a very deep trouble. And for the past 20 years, I've been working on various works, monoprints and paintings and collage combination works that are in response to that crisis. And I belong to two organizations, the New England Ocean Cluster, which is a community of creators in Portland looking at the ocean, trying to make sustainable the blue economy. And I'm also involved with the Navigating Cancer and Art community of artists and scientists who are working together to try to think about ways to bring cancer awareness to the public.
Thanks, Michael. That's really interesting to hear about those two projects you're working on, those two organizations. I'll be sure to check them out myself, and I hope everyone else will too. And if people are interested in finding out a bit more about Michael's work, artwork, writing, and teaching, as Michael said earlier, it's michaeltorlen.com is the best place to find you.
That's the portfolio site. And
Right.
then I have a new site, michaeltorlenauthor.com, which talks about this book, Studio Seeing. And then I'm on Instagram as Michael Torlen. And I'm getting some videos made, which I'll probably also be posting. And Coast Street Arts in Portland is going to host a book signing and author talk on the 28th of September. So anybody who's in the Portland, Maine area can drop by Coast Street Arts. You can find, also have some work at Lupin Gallery, which is on Mohegan Island. And I've showed work in Green Hut and Coast Street Arts in Portland at the moment. I mean, I had two shows there, one in Green Hut and one in Coast Street Arts last year.
Well, if anyone can get to one of those shows, I strongly advise they do, because your work is very powerful, and I've particularly been taken by it. And of course, if people can't see it in person, then there's a wealth and depth of material available online. So do Google Michael Torlen. And then, of course, come to intellectbooks.com if you're interested in finding out more about the book, or of course, buying a copy. So Studio Seeing is now available from intellectbooks.com, and of course from all good bookshops. And do go and place an order if it isn't in stock, because I'm sure they better get it in for you. Michael, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful talking to you about this book and about your art practice. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, James, and Intellect. Bye-bye.